Dr. Brian Rucker has just brought me to the camp.
Gordon Johnston Museum, Carabel Beach.
And and so what are we learning about World War II here?
We're going to be looking at the home front, some of the training grounds that are in the Panhandle. And we're today at the Camp Gordon Johnston Museum. And Manny Gass is going to give us a little bit of a description.
Oh, awesome, Manny. Thank you. Well, tell us about, when was this the camp started up, and then what was the purpose it said?
Camp Gordon Johnston was started in 1942 as an amphibious training center for the U.S. Navy originally, and then after the Navy took over most of the amphibious training, it became an Army base, and they trained infantry units here. They did basic training here. They also trained combat engineers, trained nurses. Towards the end of the war, they were training for the invasion of Japan here. But this diorama here shows men training in Carabel Beach, Florida around early 1943. They trained for the Pacific as well as the European theater here.
So training was pretty much a piece of cake, and then...
It was a piece of cake compared to what they encountered in real combat, but the conditions here, that was no piece of cake. The conditions were very rough. You had bugs, wild animals, the heat.
I know it wasn't
humidity.
a piece of cake. In fact, people died in training here.
People did die in training. You had live fire training exercises where guys they'd lift their head up too high and get hit by the machine gun fire. There was an incident with a landing craft during a very bad storm. Instead of hitting a beach, they hit a sandbar. So 14 men went into the water and drowned.
And it happened with some paratroopers also?
There were some paratroopers. Towards the end of the war, they were training to invade Japan. The wind carried them into the water, and so some of them drowned.
Now, as this moved on and progressed, there began to be POWs moved in here to house them.
Yes, there were POWs here.
Where were they coming from?
Many of them were captured in North Africa by the British.
They didn't have room for them?
They didn't have room to put them, so they sent them to the United States. Many of them were first in Alabama, and then many of them were sent here.
The place in Alabama, I remember the name. What the fort up there where they were located, do you remember?
I can't remember. I was just reading about it yesterday.
Yeah,
in fact, I have a newspaper article on a man.
Aliceville, maybe somewhere near Aliceville.
Aliceville, yes.
Yeah. And so those guys came down here, and then as the POWs worked their way through, they became fond of the U.S. and maintained relationships.
Yes.
So a lot of them did.
Matter of fact, there's a story of one man who was here. His name was Herman Joseph Blumhardt. We have some of his stuff here. Herman worked in the bakery at Camp Gordon Johnston. And there's an interesting story about him. Our postmaster who worked on the camp, he was a civilian. So he moved down here from Tallahassee with his family, and his daughter, her name was Vivian. She had a birthday coming up. This was around 1944. So they baked her a cake, which was quite a treat back when, during a time of rationing. But it was a huge birthday cake because all they had were these huge company-sized pans which would fit in the back of a pickup truck. She met Herman, I believe this was somewhere around about 2005. And they got into a conversation. He mentioned that he'd worked in a bakery. He said, "Oh, you probably remember baking a birthday cake for a little girl." I said, "Yes, I baked that cake, so I was that little girl." Now, Vivian, she's a retired nurse, and she lives up in Tallahassee now.
Isn't that a great story?
Yes.
That's great. And then you have all these famous people that came through here. Generals.
Omar Bradley trained here
trained
with the 28th Division. That was before he got promoted.
There's so much here to learn.
Yes.
And what do you think is one of the favorite things people see when they come here? Oh, there's Omar.
This is Miss Vivian here. She collected patches. In fact,
That was the little girl.
That was the little girl pointing up to a flag that was given to her she had several pen pals who'd served overseas.
Yeah.
She's pointing up to a flag that was sent back to her
I'll be darned.
And that flag is on display right up there.
I have a
now.
photo of that. Yeah,
Yes.
that's
This is General Omar Bradley and his men,
he's the guy right in the middle.
and that is his patch off of his uniform that he gave to Vivian.
Oh wow, 28th Division.
Yes. Omar Bradley's original opinion of Camp Gordon Johnston was that whoever picked this location should have been court-martialed for stupidity, because it was just a horrible, rough place, But he appreciated the good training that his men received here. In fact, he'd mentioned in one of his memoirs many years later about how good the training was here, because it hardened them for combat. It hardened them for the environment that they were going to encounter overseas.
Manny, I want to thank you for this brief introduction. I hope a lot of people see this and come down here and visit the museum.
Yes.
And we'll make sure that it shows up on me3tv.org and wherever else we can plaster it.
Alrighty.
But thank you so much.
We're going to be working new hours starting on October 1st. We'll be open from 11 o'clock until 5 o'clock, Tuesday through Saturday.
Excellent. So people should take note of that.
So come on down.
And my tour guide over here is Brian Rucker from Pensacola State College. What a guy. He knows all this stuff, and if you didn't hear it from here, tell people to go to take his course at Pensacola State or the University of West Florida and learn something about Florida that you probably didn't know.
Or read a book.
Or read a book.